There is something to this myth, because Kant does tell us that a good will alone is good in itself, not that the consequences are what determine the rightness or wrongness of an action. That's a utilitarian thesis. Kant tells us the rightness or wrongness of an action is determined by the intention, not the motive. But it's really a myth that Kant just doesn't care about consequences. Let's look at a couple of aspects of Kant in which consequences clearly do matter. First of all, Kant says that in order to know how to apply the categorical imperative, his rule for determining the requirements of moral law in any scenario, in order to understand how to apply the categorical imperative properly, we need a judgment sharpened by experience. That means we're going to learn from the consequences how to apply the categorical imperative more accurately. Second, he says Aristotelian ethics, rooted as it is in human nature and aiming as it does at hypothetical imperatives. If you want to be happy, you must do these things because that's the proper function for a human being, which is a requirement for human happiness. Aristotelian philosophy doesn't give us moral law, but that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. And Kant says it's fine. It's just not the most important kind of moral philosophy, because moral law matters more. But Aristotle's okay. He doesn't say Aristotle's bad. He says moral law is more important. Now, he actually says there is need for something like this. We need a practical psychology. We need a moral psychology. We need an understanding of the ways humans work and the way they're motivated so that we can help people live according to moral law better. That also requires learning from experience. And then finally, there's the test of whether an action is right, whether it's done in accordance with moral law. Well, to be a little more precise, every action is done according to some principle. I want to drink some tea, therefore I turn on the kettle. I'm acting according to the principle, if you want tea, turn on the kettle. I'm coughing, so I get a cough drop. I'm acting according to the principle, if you're coughing, get a cough drop. I want to pay my taxes and get a big refund. My principle is, I want to file for my taxes and get a big refund. My principle is, if you want a big refund, file your taxes, etc., etc., etc. All our actions are towards some goal, and we can articulate how the action gets to the goal in some principle, which Kant calls a maxim. And he says, act only according to maxims that are universalizable. This is, I believe, the first version of the categorical imperative. He says, act only according to those principles that you could wish everyone would act according to. Now, every time you ask what it's like for everyone to act according to those principles, you have to ask, what would be the consequences if everyone did? And so here, again, Kant is not totally neglecting consequences. And it seems that in every case, when Kantian principles would approve of a maxim, would approve of an action towards an end, an action towards a goal, would approve of any principle, in order to do this, do this. In order to accomplish this, first do that. It seems like every time Kant's principles would approve that, they would approve it, at least in part, because it's one that would lead to good consequences if everyone would act according to the same principle. Now, there is more to say, of course. There are places where Kant will tell you, ignore the consequences, just do what is right. And most obviously, he's talking about the consequences to yourself. But that does not mean he's telling you to ignore the consequences. He might just be telling you to take seriously the consequences to others. Does he ever say, ignore the consequences to others, just do what's right? Maybe, maybe not. He might say, ignore consequences, do what you know is right, act according to that maxim. You don't know how it's going to work out, but act according to the universalizable maxim. In order to accomplish X, first do Y. But even still, there's not a total neglect of consequences. In order to know whether it's universalizable, you have to consider the consequences. What if everybody else acted the same way? What would be the result? So Kant does not begin with consequences, and he does not use consequences as the test of the morality of an action. The test is the motivation, not the consequences. And motivation and moral law are his starting point, not consequences, in his analysis of ethics. But the consequences are included in the analysis.